What we know about colonial Caribbean life was that most of the runaway slaves were men. By some accounts, upwards of 80% of fugitive slaves were male. Here we're talking about a woman who was West African born, whose original name was lost to history, but we know her as Grandy Nanny of the Maroons.
Queen Nanny, also known as Grandy Nanny, was a West African-born woman who became a celebrated Maroon military leader and freedom fighter on the island of Jamaica at the beginning of the 18th century. Described as a small, nimble, discerning woman, she spent most of her time studying the forest and freshwater ecosystems of the Blue and John Crow Mountains. She was skilled in herbal medicine, and her knowledge of the ways of the mountains was so great that it was said that she could command the forces of nature itself. The British labeled her the Mountain Witch, while her Afro-Indigenous followers revered her as a wise woman who taught the ancestral eco-spiritual ways of Africa, the ways of healing and sacred ways of protecting all that lived. On March 31st, 1982, the Right Excellent Queen Nanny of the Maroons was conferred the Order of National Hero of Jamaica.
Nanny as a person, we choose to describe her in basically the roles that she played in the community. First, she was a priestess. She was responsible for the spiritual life of the community, the communication between the ancestors and the persons who are alive, and communicating with the Onyankipong. Then she was basically the chieftainess, the person who was responsible for the military arm of the community in that regard, the militia as it were, those persons that were fighting. And she was also the queen. She was this regal person that persons would have to interface with if they were allowed to, in terms of anything in the community. And even more than all of these, she was a mother. That is why today we still refer to ourselves as Grandy Nanny Yoyo, mean that we are all children of Grandy Nanny.
There is a tendency for the work of herbalists and healers working outside of the bounds of Western knowledge systems to be devalued or looked upon with suspicion. Many of these workers are women following the tradition of Nanny and of our African forebears. They know guinea hen weed and ram goat dash along and leaf of life and jack in the bush. They know what to boil for bad nerves or pain a belly or a broken heart. Unfortunately, these healers and this knowledge base sometimes gets buried or devalued, negated to what people call back-a-bush, when actually what is really needed is a realignment to what we might call bush smarts, an attunement with the land and with nature and with every hill and gully and plant that grows there. the ability to commune with nature for our survival and spiritual development. Tell me about Nanny the healer.
Yes, in her own right, she was a healer. And you know, we as women, in dealing with nation building, you have to think in that manner. Sometimes it's not even the herbs that she used. Everything was used for healing. Everything. Because she has the energy to do so. She was a high priestess, traditional priestess. And most traditional priestesses are healers.
Yes.
Even the way how Nanny Town, the region that become Nanny Town, is in a valley. You know, and the valley itself, geographically, a valley is a receptive place. It carries that energy, and it is associated to the feminine energy. So in that valley, she could be able to heal even soldiers that was wounded. They could come and be safe in there until their wound was healed. And sometimes even for the future, the children could be, you know, it was a space that children could be conceived in. And so all that is part of the healing as well.
In the Natural History Museum, we spend a lot of time looking at the plants that are used for medicinal purposes. So cerasee, for example, would be something that would have grown in Africa. Cheney root, used for tonics. Dog blood, you know, all these plants, we know them as having medicinal purposes and use them medicinally. That may be thought by some person to be coming down spiritually, but some of it is from our African heritage, you know, what was passed on orally from our ancestors.
The one plant that I can tell you that I live by like gospel is the cerasee. I remember as a child, the very first time I experienced my menstruation, my mom said to me, okay, drink this. And from now you're gonna drink it 2 days before your time. And that was told to me to do. And I've maintained that. And I can tell you, I have had a beautiful, pain-free life to this day.
Well, you know, back then in the days, right? So there's no doctor down the road that you can run to. There was no hospital down the road that you can run to. Everything was within the compound. Everything was within what you can do. And people develop these skills and how you use different plants for different ailments, different complaints. And people pretty much know, okay, fine, so if I get a cut, I know I'm going to go get a piece of fresh cut and how to start the bleeding. If I'm by myself or if I'm with others, you know, persons know how to do that. If you have a bellyache, they know what kind of thing you are supposed to do. What happens if I got a bellyache, I'm going to get some guava butter, I'm going to get the guava leaf or whatever. Or, you know, somebody mentioned about the samansa, you know, the Black Betty is good enough for that.
Right here you have this is the devil ass whip. And this is one of the herbs, along with this one that they call spirit weed, which is good for epilepsy.
Okay.
And in Caribbean country, they call it shadow benny, like in Trinidad. It's a very spiritual herb, a very ancient herb here in Jamaica, and it's good. They call it fitzweed too, because many people call epilepsy in Jamaica, we call it fits. You know, which is what medical system calls seizure. So this is one of the herbs that good for that and also good for mental illness and depression and these things.
Within mountain communities, regionally and globally, women, both past and present, have been at the forefront of the management of ecological and forest resources. This leadership role has its origins in the African societies from which the women first came, and its influence has been passed down through the generations via our grandmothers and great-grandmothers, a woman lineage. It is the women who are the custodians of forest biodiversity, the keepers of ancestral knowledge, the ways of herbal healing, and the scholarship of the lesser-known things of the earth, the waters, and trees.
I see this project as recognizing the plants of Jamaica, and I see this project as recognizing Nanny's recognition of the plants of Jamaica, and the importance of the ecology of Jamaica, and the importance to safeguard such a beautiful, beautiful place. We oftentimes do not stop enough, I'm speaking to myself now, to pay attention to the most minute things around us and the necessity to safeguard these things. But within that, there's the story of the pumpkin seed, that she planted and that grew overnight and that she was able to feed the people around her with, even as they were trying to starve them out and, to get them into slavery and all sorts of things all at once. Now, I think that that story is very, very important because it signifies how much the landscape and her knowledge of the landscape meant to her and how much she knew this landscape and how much not only she nurtured the landscape, but the fact that if she nurtured the landscape would nurture her and the people as well. It reminds me too of my grandmother and my great-grandmother in particular, who, we're supposed to be descendants, Maroon descendants. We come from not very far from where Grandy Nanny is. There was not a bush or herb that my great-grandmother did not know. She had such an intimate knowledge of this Jamaican landscape. Intimate, every bush or herb she could tell you all about. And I envy that, and I'm trying so much to get back to that. And I think we owe so much to Grandy Nanny and to so many of our female ancestors for nurturing that botanical knowledge and passing it down to us.
People had a great respect for the forest because the forest was what provided you with food, shelter. It provided you with medicine. Everything was there. You just have to make sure that you treat it the way it had to be treated and you can receive from it as much as you would have given. Because if you go out and make, wanton destruction of what was there, you're gonna find yourself in problem.
There are many common names that Africans use for their plants, and the Europeans came and decided that there was a system of using Latin names. So all our plants and animals have Latin names. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, we have kept the tradition of using common names, right? And that common name extends not only in Jamaica, but throughout other countries and throughout the diaspora. It's important for us to keep those common names because that's how we made those connections. And for us in Jamaica, there may be even plants that we still use and call them by their African names. What we do at the Institute of Jamaica is that we maintain a common name index for all our plants. So even if there are Latin names for plants, when we go out in the country, we still ask people, what you call this plant?
It is noted that Colonel Sterling has said, that Nanny saw the forest as her sanctuary. She saw it as her home. She saw it as the place, to be, and to be meant to be one with. And for us, that is exactly what we need to consider in terms of the respect for our biodiversity, the respect for our environment, recognizing it as something that can feed us, that can sustain us, but the way in which we approach it needs to be with a sense of understanding the plants, their seasons, their times, how to harvest, and how we can actually harness this from an entrepreneurial perspective.
We can also think about the ways that the stories of nature are very different from the stories from the rest of the world. You know, the way how they center the birds of the night, the spiders, the different plants and trees, which we really don't hear much about in other cultures, but because they were so key in West African cultures, we talk about them today. These are things which tie us to place, tie us to land, tie us to history, tie us to heritage. And it is things that myself, as a conservation biologist, find fascinating, because I wonder why I was never told about them within the context of biodiversity and protection as a child. But I only knew them as stories, not even understanding that these stories were West African stories and that they had centuries of history behind them. These are stories that is so important for us to tell youth today, because it's important in terms of how we understand identity and how we can ensure that we are connected to the land.
For Queen Nanny and our ancestors, many types of birds, trees, and herbs were very important, filled with meaning and sacredness. From their one-pot meals to the perfumes and oils they used for wellness and beauty hygiene. Pimento leaves to tighten the skin and sweeten the bath water. Kwaku bush for liver spots. Cerci tea for cleansing and pressure. Okra and kakun seeds to strengthen the body. Bisi to calm the nerves. These were not only material objects, these were deeply spiritual and symbolic materials. When we enact the use of these herbs, teas, and traditional ways of healing, we are remembering Grandi Nanny and our African foreparents. In observing birds such as the Jamaican owls or patu, and cuckoos or rainbirds, we remember the primordial ancestral spirits of our West African homelands. And in so doing, we also remember ourselves, our beginnings, our roots, and our collective repository of knowledge, healing, and empowerment.
Nanny mean to us what the Holy Ghost mean to Christians.
Oh, I love that.
You understand?
Yes.
Your comforter.
Right.
That spirit that you can go to anytime.
Yes.
That spirit that is not seen, but it is there.
Yes.
And you can tap into it, and it
Yes.
sustains you, and it gives you strength, and it, you work with it. That's the connection that Christians have between them and the Almighty God.
Right.
So Nanny represents that spirit within the nation.
If there was a situation where spirituality and spiritism would have to be involved, she was there. She was, the great Fete woman. Mind you, there were other Fete women and other Fete men in the community, But I'm saying she was the foremost one, and that would have interfaced. So she would have to do that. It's like you are preparing the warriors to go into battle. It's not about necessarily training them out to shoot a gun or to use a bayonet or to fire a bow and arrow or to use a jonga or something like that. It was more spiritual. Or you prepare them that when they go out into battle, they wouldn't get hurt. And that is the most important. So she would have to play that role as the person who would prepare them from a spiritual point of view.
Obia is one of the most undiluted and fierce spirituality coming out of Kemet that was never touched nor undiluted in certain way. And so Suriname still use it, the Maroons there. They will say this is their Obia house. And when you go there and you say, that's something bad in Jamaica, they said, no, it is healing. If you are complaining of your belly, they will take you a medicine. And when they bring it to you, they said, I bring a Obia for your belly. Meaning they bring a healing potent for you.
I think it's important for us to recover hidden knowledge and to tell untold stories because it extends and expands who we know ourselves to be as Jamaicans, as women, as people, and particularly as people of color in this world. I remember as a beginning writer and as a beginning thinker, scholar, visual artist, that I went looking for Grandy Nanny. Couldn't find her in the archives on the island, or I should say could barely find her. And the things that I found about her were grotesque, you know. There was a focus on her quote-unquote ugliness. There was a focus on her sexuality in very demeaning ways, you know, and I felt shamed. I felt very ashamed of her. And then I had a moment as a very young woman, barely 18, 19, something like that, where I had to stop and start to think for myself, who was it that were writing these stories about her? Who was it that was telling these stories about her? And what was I going to do about this?
For me, it is particularly important and particularly urgent. There's an urgency here that we need to find ways, of embedding in our social practice, embedding in our education, the significance of nanny in our structure. This is something that if I should ask any child on the street, who is nanny? What's the significance of nanny? What does nanny mean to you? I can get a response, It has to be brought into that kind of a space. So if it means that we need to have a restructuring, if you will, of what is taught and how it is taught in schools, then I guess that's where we need to go.
Nanny is not just for us, the Maroon, but for the wider Jamaican. When you go abroad and you hear people speak about what they know of this warrior queen from Jamaica, for us to think that she just belongs to us here and to that we are limiting the powers that she carries. And we don't yet rise up and wake up to understand the value and the potential of this warrior queen that end up here in this very island, set foot on this island. And her story is similar to many other African queens. So we know that she walked in the footsteps amongst the glory of the queens.
The glory of the
The
queens.
glory of the queens. Yeah, man. Which when you think of Empress Taitu, when you think of Ya Santiwa, when you think of Nefertiti, Queen Amina, you're seeing Nanny in those realms. Those are her masters and mistress that she walk amongst as ascended one, you know?
I believe also too we need to canonize Nanny and immortalize her in more prominent works of art in our spaces, in our libraries. I think we need to lift the bar and the standard of how she's represented, recognizing that Nanny comes with a significant representation in a very Pan-African space. She's not just nanny to us, she's nanny to Ghana, she is Ashanti, yes, as much as she is Jamaican. And so I believe that we need to elevate how she's represented, where we see her, how we talk about her, and to immortalize her in that way within so many different spaces that are, you cannot go by in a town center, a library, spaces of learning without encountering this woman or a representation of this woman. And I believe that is particularly significant and something that we need to invest in, something that we need to address and deal with. I would love to see a statue of Nanny somewhere. That I think is significant and something that we need to pay attention to. Because if we don't, who is going to do it? And how can you convince your children and those coming that this is someone of significance when in society today, in our thinking and our process and approach to recognition or identifying individuals of significance, we have not done so. So it is something that we can work at, and we can continue to build on the legacy that the stories are built around. Where Nanny is concerned, we can unearth that, build on that for our future, starting today.
Obinriti wo son hayayo nane. Obinriti wo son hayayo nane. Obinriti wo son.
Sometimes our nanny power lays dormant within us and is not harnessed or acknowledged, but still it is there. In a fundamental way, I see that reimagining nanny is really a process of remembering, regathering, reformulating who we truly are as Black women, and thereby coming into our full nanny potential in all its permutations. In the times in which we live, we need all of our intellectual and spiritual and healing weapons, and it is critical for us as Black people and as Black women to recover and reclaim our nanny consciousness. To do this is a true act of Black empowerment and a true act of Sankofa, returning to the past and retrieving what is found there in order to move forward with more authority into the future. I believe that if we can enact such a retrieval, we can be a collective force as Nanny was a force.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Nane wo, nane yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Nane wo, nane yeah. Nane wo, nane yeah. Orinti wo so.